Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. We took a week off last week, but we are back this week to kind of really dive in to a couple of NBA topics. And because we didn't have episode last week, there's two different topics that I kind of want to talk about this week. No guests this week, so just a couple thoughts that have been kind of ruminating in my mind while the NBA playoffs have been going on. Right. So the first thing I want to talk about is how a 7 game series changes so much in the way that a fan base or a fan of a team will watch a series, will come into and out of a series with different sorts of mindsets. So I'll start by saying that I experienced this personally as a Knicks fan, watching both the first round series against the 76ers and the second round series against the Indiana Pacers. Both of these series went pretty long. The Philadelphia series went 6 games. Indiana series, of course, went 7 games, which ultimately led to the Knicks season ending and Indiana moving on to play Boston in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then I thought about a friend of mine who's a Mavericks fan and the emotions that he was feeling as they were going in their second round series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, which they ultimately won in 6 games and now are facing the Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals. And what ended up happening is that players that I previously didn't have an opinion on or maybe even liked a little bit, all of a sudden became the enemy. And that happened with my friend as well. You know, in the past, we would talk about Oklahoma City. We would talk about Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and how good of a defender Luguentz Dort is. And in this series, it turned into Gilgeous-Alexander is a free throw merchant. Luguentz Dort is a dirty player. You know, all this stuff that you start feeling as a fan. And it really had me interested in what how a 7 game series changes so much, right? So you start really, it's the familiarity, right? In the NBA during the regular season, it's a long regular season, 82 games, right? And you typically play a team anywhere between to 4 or 5 times. And those aren't back to back, right? Typically. You know, sometimes you have a home and home, but typically it's I'm gonna play Boston in January. I might not see them again till March, right? And that is kind of just the grind of the regular season. It's on to the next game, on to the next game, on to the next game, trying to stack up wins, maintain your playoff seeding, get into the playoffs. But once you're there, now you're faced with the proposition of having to beat a team 4 times out of 7 tries to be able to figure out a way to exploit their weaknesses over and over and over again to get victory. And so when you have playoff series, you see the same lineups, the same rotations, maybe a little tweak here, a little tweak there, every single game or every other day, depending on how the schedule lines up. So if I'm a Knicks fan and I'm watching them play the 76ers in the first round, I'm watching Joel Embiid do all sorts of stuff, right? Try to get foul calls, scoring a bunch of points, blocking shots, whatever. And I see that over and over and over and over again over the course of 6 games. Eventually, if I have a deep rooting interest like I did, then you're going to start building up animosity towards a player. And this especially happens when it's a close game, right? I'll use Boston and Cleveland as a little bit of the counterpoint. That series was over in 5 games. You know, there were a couple of handled victories there. Everybody kind of knew that Boston was a better team, especially once Donovan Mitchell and Jared Allen and Karis LeVert started missing games. So the animosity isn't as heavy, right? Because you're an underpowered team. You're missing players due to injury. The games are getting out of hand at stretches, and so we just weren't good enough. We have to get better or in the off season, right? There isn't that hatred, that animosity, that extensive dislike. But when it's close games, you're seeing your team go on runs, their team go on runs, and it's neck and neck until you have a close finish at the end, right? And when you get into those moments, one bounce here, one bounce there changes the whole trajectory of a series. To use the Knicks and Pacers example, the Knicks were up 2-0 in the series. Game three comes and, it looks like they might have it won. Andrew Nemhard hits a ridiculous deep three, 31 feet, the longest of his career, to give you an idea of how unlikely that was. And instead of the Knicks going up 3-0, they go up, they go to 2-1. They lose the next game, and all of a sudden it's a brand new series. They go up three games to two, and eventually, end up losing the series in seven to Indiana. But that moment is going to live in the minds of Knicks fans for a while because you look at Game Three as the game that could have been, and these close games and these moments make you feel differently about a team. You might see just the other day in the Minnesota Dallas game in the Western Conference Finals. The Wolves are up by two, and 12 seconds left. The ball's going to Luka Doncic. He starts off in Jaden McDaniels, gets a switch, and ends up on Rudy Gobert. Every single basketball fan I know has said, how do you allow that to happen when Luka just has an advantage and can get wherever he wants to in terms of finding a spot to get a good shot off on Rudy? So you start micro analyzing the coach there, right? Where you start saying, Chris Finch did this. He shouldn't have put this player in that sort of a position, right? And that it's those type of margins, right? So maybe if McDaniel stays on him, Luka misses the shot. We're talking a lot differently about this series. Minnesota fans feel a lot differently. Dallas fans feel a lot differently, right? So another thing that happens though during these series when this is happening is there's a hatred element of a player and a respect element of a player. So let me give you a Knicks fan perspective on that from the first two series, or from the two series that they played this year before getting out. Against Philly, their two stars, Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. Entering the series, I think Knicks fans liked Maxey a lot, maybe because it reminded them a little bit of Emmanuel Quickley since they went to school together and came out in the same draft class. And Embiid was respected as an MVP level player that most Knicks fans wouldn't have been opposed to the Knicks trying to trade and acquire, right? By the end of the series, Knicks fans are looking at Embiid as a dirty player, and they have nothing but respect for Tyrese Maxey. So I have both played good series in terms of offensive output, putting up numbers, leading their teams to win, so on and so forth. Embiid, of course, had a number of just reckless plays that a lot of fans considered dirty throughout the beginning of the series. Obviously, there was the injury stuff that was going on, and a lot of Knicks fans, just because you're a psychotic fan, you are only going to see it through the lens of your team. We're like, well, how hobbled is he really? Is he 50% or is he really closer than 90%? That was the conversation that was happening with a lot of Knicks fans. Maxey, on the other hand, went about his business, didn't say anything controversial in the media. Nick Nurse, the Sixers coach, did, but Maxey was kind of always the consummate professional in terms of what he was saying, right? He was saying, well, we got to be better here. We got to not do this. We got to execute, all the typical cookie cutter lines you expect from a star player in the playoff series. You don't want to give the other team bulletin board material. I think Knicks fans respected that. And because he was playing at such an elite level offensively, you came out really respecting Tyrese Maxey and what he can do on the basketball court. On the flip side, Knicks fans blame Embiid for kicking Isaiah Hartenstein in the groin. They blame Embiid for Mitchell Robinson's injury that ended his season. So that's that part. Now, in Indiana, the same type of dynamic, right? Pascal Siakam had a really good series against the Knicks. I haven't seen one Knicks fan say anything bad about Pascal Siakam. Just that he was a matchup nightmare from Josh Hart. They wonder if he could have been contained if OG Anunoby didn't get hurt. But ultimately, it's more good things than bad. Now, Tyrese Halliburton, so there's a little bit of history there, right? The Knicks could have drafted him in 2020. They did. They passed on him, so did a few other teams, and drafted Obi Toppin, who, ironically, was traded to the Indiana Pacers this past offseason. I think Halliburton holds that against Knicks still. even though he was drafted by the Kings and eventually traded to the Pacers and other teams passed up on. Additionally, there's this Nick's Garden villain thing that is associated with Reggie Miller, who is, of course, an Indiana Pacers legend. And I think Halliburton embraced taking on that role. And what you would see and what Nick fans saw was there was a little bit of a lack of aggression on his behalf during this series. And it led to him passing up easy layups and, talking trash to the fans at MSG when the team was up 20 in game 7. And a lot of Nick fans looked at that like, yeah, he's just a front runner. He's a front runner. He's cocky only when they're winning, silent when they're losing, doesn't want the ball in crunch time situations. And I myself found myself just building up with this vitriol for Tyrese Halliburton, a player who in the past I had thought had a really fun play style as a pass first point guard. And to be fair, we don't have a lot of those anymore in the NBA. But because of the familiarity of contempt that you have, you see this guy, you know, making big shots and, making sure you hear about it type thing. And, you end up just building up a reservoir of animosity. Whereas with Siakam, I didn't really have that because he wasn't really trash talking, right? You're just like, man, this guy is just lights out. He's just getting to his spots. He's just playing excellent basketball. And that's the interesting thing where you gain respect, but you also lose respect for a good player in both instances, depending on the circumstance, right? For a lot of Knicks fans, for instance, didn't really like that Halliburton wore a Reggie Miller choke sign T-shirt or hoodie, excuse me, after they had won Game 7, and it just comes into the whole universe of fandom where we're going to criticize somebody for kicking us while we're down, right? But these type of moments, the moments you see from Embiid, the moments you see from Halliburton, especially, this is how rivalries happen in the NBA, right? You go through these moments, like on the lower level, bringing back the Dallas example, they had this with the Clippers. The Clippers and the Mavs had gone through first round series a few years in a row, and there was moments that happened that kind of spoke to that budding type of rivalry. And ultimately, it's good for the NBA, right? We want the animosity. The reason why people love the 90s so much, people my age in their late 30s, maybe in their 40s, who watched that era, they loved it because there was a sense of I'm going to see you again, right? And I'll get the better of you next time. It's why a lot of people love the LeBron Curry stuff over the years, right? Because you wanted to see who would win the next blow. Lakers Celtics in the 80s was the same thing, right? There's a storytelling aspect there that's just incredibly fascinating to watch as a fan. And I think we need more of that, right? Especially with all the player movement and stuff like that. I think you had that a little bit with Boston and Miami. I really wish Jimmy Butler would have played that first round series because you could have really seen it bubble over the past few years. Both of those teams have had ambitions of getting to the finals, right, and stood in each other's way. So I think that's what makes the playoffs so special. It's what makes it such a spectacle to behold. Going back to the Pacers series, after the first couple of games in New York, which was, it just seems like a lifetime ago now, but Pacers coach Rick Carlisle had something to say, which ultimately ended up in him paying a $35,000 fine, where he was criticizing the officials, and how he felt that they were very pro New York in the way they called the game. And you can argue that he had a somewhat of a valid point with the end of Game 1, the DiVincenzo blocking foul that looked a little ticky tack, right? And he basically said that the Pacers were just a small market team that needed a fair chance. And it's it's a comment that a lot of coaches, a lot of fans, a lot of players have made over the years, right? That, oh, we don't play in LA or New York or Chicago, right? We don't play in these huge glamorous markets where where it's incentivized for the league for those teams to do well, right? We're behind the eight ball because we're just a little small market, and everything gets taken away from us because we're the little guy, right? It's a classic David versus Goliath argument. But you really start to think about it. How underserved are small markets in the NBA specifically, really, right? So let's take a kind of a quick overview of market sizes in the NBA. Now, excluded from this list is Toronto because obviously they're in Canada, so there is no data that integrates Canadian media market size with American media market size. So we're only looking at the American cities for right now. And you look at teams that are kind of on the up and up, right? Um, you have Minnesota, right? They have Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert. Excellent team. They're in the Western Conference Finals right now. 15th ranked media market in the country. That's below Houston, Washington, D.C., Detroit. So if you really wanted those teams to do well because they have a bigger market, you would think that they would, that there would be some sort of quote unquote rigging or whatever, right? Orlando has a exciting young team, 19th market size. Don Morant, one of the more exciting young players in the league, probably will have Memphis back in the playoff picture next year when he comes back healthy. 48th media market size. New Orleans with Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, another exciting young team. 53rd media market size. Now let's go on the flip side to the top. So the number one market in the country is New York City. Yeah, I think we all know that, right? The Knicks have been out of the championship conversation for many years, decades. The Brooklyn Nets are a dumpster fire currently, both play in that same market. You look at LA, they've been underachieving since they won a title in 2020 in the bubble, and the Clippers have never been able to get out of their own way. Chicago, since the end of the Jordan era, has been irrelevant. Philadelphia can't get to the conference finals. They're number four size. Number five is Dallas, who is in the conference finals currently. But even they are a little bit of a surprise. So the point being is that elite teams don't necessarily have to be in big markets to be successful. If anything, the NBA wants small markets to be good because they don't want them to feel this way. It's not like in soccer, right? Think about if you're in the Premier League. A lot of the really good teams either play in London or Manchester, two big cities in the UK, right? Arsenal, Chelsea, Tottenham. Um, these are all big clubs that play in London. Manchester United, Manchester City play in Manchester, another big city in the UK, right? Those those teams benefit from the market they play in, and they get more money, they get more deals, whatever, and then they're going to be at the top of the hill. In the NBA, it's a little bit different, right? You look at the bottom of the list. Milwaukee's 35th in market size. They're one of the elite teams in the NBA in prognostications year after year because of Giannis and now Dame Lillard. The San Antonio Spurs, 37th in media size. They won the lottery last year and got Victor Wembanyama, who's probably going to be a top five player in the league within the next couple of years. Again, they were going against like Washington and Detroit, 9th and 11th in the media market rating. Oklahoma City, the youngest and probably most exciting young team we've seen in many years, 45th television market size. The reason that doesn't matter, especially now, is because of the internet. You think about it like this: social media is everywhere. The NBA is very much involved in the social media realm and atmosphere. It always is going to be able to proliferate a superstar regardless of where they play. It's why Zion Williamson gets commercials. John Morant has an exclusive shoe deal. Why Oklahoma City had Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant, and that didn't hurt their valuation at all over the years because you could market these guys online. People get league pass and could watch these teams whenever they want, and it's not really like it was, say, in the early 2000s or in the late 90s, where you were reliant on national TV games. You were reliant on all this other stuff. And, a lot of people think that if you're a big market, you're going to be able to lure all these free agents. Think about it like this: Chicago hasn't been able to lure a top name free agent forever. The Knicks got here not by acquiring big name free agents, by acquiring Jalen Brunson, who was considered to be just an okay point guard, by acquiring Julius Randle, who was, discarded by the Lakers and eventually the Pelicans, by drafting and developing a guy like Mitchell Robinson and Miles McBride, by acquiring Dante DiVincenzo, just a role player, by trading for Josh Hart, a guy who was on multiple teams in multiple years. So they didn't get the big name free agent either. Philadelphia is really the only big market that kind of goes after the big names, but it hasn't really led to any success. Right? There's rumors of them going after Paul George or maybe even OG Anunoby if he doesn't re-sign with the Knicks. And so I think there's an illusion that these big markets get all these players. What really gets players is organizational health and right opportunity. Donovan Mitchell, a lot of rumors that he wants out of Cleveland. Nothing is surfaced yet, but there's a good chance they offer him a big extension and he stays there. It's not because it's a big market, it's because he sees what's around them and probably sees that they have a good opportunity to win in the future. Most players, all they care about is winning because they're going to get the exposure one way or the other. Every team has gotten some level of national TV, even like shitty teams like Charlotte. They've gotten some national TV games on NBA TV in the regular season. So I think there's a fallacy to the big market thing. You think about like Kevin Durant, he didn't go to the Warriors because they were in San Francisco, the sixth biggest media market in the country. He went there because they had Steph Curry, right? He went there because he wanted to win, and that's the important thing. Like Boston is the seventh size media market right now. When they traded for Kristaps Porzingis, it's not because he wanted to upgrade from the number 9 media market to the number 7. Going from Washington to Boston. They did it because Kristaps Porzingis wanted to win, right? And he wasn't going to win in Washington. And that's the important thing. So ultimately, I think anybody who says, "Oh, woe is us, we're just a small little market team," it's just an excuse, right? It's like, you're mad because you lost the game. And it's the same concept as when people blame referees, I think, where yeah, you're gonna blame the ref because you were dealt a little bit of a shitty hand by a call, but you don't take into account all the other things that led to that moment where you didn't execute. I think that's what Carlisle was doing there, saying that we're just a small market team. And here's the deal: like Indiana's in incredible shape moving forward. They traded for Pascal Siakam, who is more than likely going to re-sign with them because he likes playing with Tyrese Halliburton. He doesn't care that it's a 25th size media market. Nobody cares about that, right? And the whole idea of, well, small markets and you got to take care of small markets because they're so underserved and undervalued and so on and so forth. I just really think is just a disingenuous way of looking at things, an outdated way of looking at things. Small markets have gotten the top draft picks year after year. Look at it this way: Wembanyama to San Antonio, Paolo Banchero to Orlando, Nikola Jokic in Denver, 18th size media market, right? The thing, it doesn't matter. All that matters is a star in the league because the league cares about star players. They want star players on the court and they want them to do well. So, what the league is mad about now in regards to Indiana is not that small market. It's mad that Tyrese Halliburton isn't on the floor for game 3 and probably game 4. And because it's a star league. So when they say Boston, Indiana, what they think in their head is really Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown, Pascal Siakam, Tyrese Halliburton. When they see Dallas, Minnesota, they're thinking Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving. They want the big names that people recognize and will tune in for. That's what matters. It doesn't matter who they play for and what city or how big or small the market is because the star sells the show in the NBA. And so I think anybody that says, "Oh, well, league's out to make sure we don't do well because they want to see, a market like New York in the conference finals." Would the league like a New York LA finals? I'm sure they would. You get two major time zones covered. It makes a lot of sense from that aspect, but they don't care so much that they're going to put a small market team at a quote unquote disadvantage. And that's where I think Carlisle is a little disingenuous and not really thinking about it in the correct terms. And he probably was just frustrated that his team lost the game. And as we look ahead, I hope, as Indiana at the time of this recording is down 3-0 to the Celtics and could very well be swept out of the playoffs by Monday. I hope he doesn't look at it as, well, Boston's a bigger market team, so they got calls, right? No, if you lose to Boston, it's because Boston's a better team than you are. That's the end of the story. All right, guys, thank you for tuning in for another episode of the Deep Cover Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or directly on Substack at deepcover.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we will catch you all next week.